Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Has you ever paused to consider how monumental ideas like freedom and equality, ideas that, well, exploded from one revolution, could completely reshape an entire continent?
It's quite something to think about.
Exactly, and not just a continent, but how they could send ripples across the globe, inspiring profound changes that even reached, as far as our own India.
The connections are fascinating.
Today, we're embarking on a truly crucial deep dive into one of history's most transformative periods, the dramatic rise of socialism in Europe and its culmination, of course, in the Russian Revolution. This deep dive is crafted especially for you, whether you're meticulously preparing for your class 9th, 10th, or 12th board exams, or maybe setting your sights higher on competitive exams like UPSC, SSC, state PSCs, CDS, and CAPF.
That's right. We're really aiming to break it down for exam readiness.
We're going to unpack the core concepts, the pivotal historical events, and their far-reaching implications, presenting them in a structured, insightful way that helps you not just memorize, but truly understand.
Which is key for those exams.
And to guide us through this intricate landscape of social and political change, we have our expert, ready to distill the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight from our source material. So let's begin at the very foundation. What made the 19th century in Europe such a volatile crucible, almost a boiling pot, for new ideas?
That's the perfect place to start.
And how did people's responses to these calls for change differ so wildly, giving birth to those distinct political ideologies we still talk about today?
Well, the 19th century in Europe truly was a period of immense social upheaval. And you're right, it was largely ignited by those powerful ideas of freedom and equality set loose after the French Revolution.
Right, the French Revolution is the catalyst.
Exactly. Before the 18th century, European society was incredibly rigid. Think of it as being broadly divided into states and orders, with aristocracy and the church holding almost unchallenged economic and social power.
A very hierarchical structure.
Very much so. But the French Revolution, it just shattered that old order. It opened up this radical new possibility, the idea that society itself could be dramatically restructured.
That change was actually possible.
Precisely. It made people believe that wholesale change wasn't just desirable, but actually achievable. And this sparked a wave of new thinking about individual rights and, crucially, about who should truly wield social power. And the ripple effect, as you mentioned, was global. Even here in India, you had towering figures like Raja Ramohan Roy and Desrosiers actively discussing the profound significance of the French Revolution.
Really? That connection was so direct.
Oh, absolutely. Debates about post-revolutionary European concepts were widespread. What's particularly fascinating, though, is that it wasn't just a one-way street. Developments in the colonies themselves, well, they, in turn, also reshaped and reinterpreted these very ideas of societal change.
So a dynamic exchange.
Exactly, a truly dynamic, interconnected historical process.
So the French Revolution unleashed this powerful desire for change. But you mentioned not everyone wanted the same kind of transformation. How did these responses vary, and what were these distinct political traditions that emerged?
That's an excellent point. Because while the French Revolution certainly lit the fuse, it's vital to understand that the desire for change wasn't uniform at all.
Okay.
Responses ranged from those who wanted, maybe, a slow, gradual evolution to those who demanded a complete radical overhaul. And this spectrum gave rise to three main political traditions that really dominated the 19th century: the conservatives, liberals, and radicals.
Right, those key terms.
Yes, but it's important to remember these terms are fluid. Their exact meaning, what they advocated for, could shift slightly depending on the specific historical context you see.
Got it. Context matters.
Always. So let's delve into each. The liberals were a significant force. At their core, they envisioned a nation that extended tolerance to all religions.
Which was quite radical then.
Absolutely revolutionary for the time, because most European states had an official state religion and openly discriminated against others. Think about Britain favoring the Church of England, or Spain and Austria championing the Catholic Church.
Okay.
Liberals also vehemently opposed the uncontrolled power of dynastic rulers. They were champions of individual rights, advocating for a representative, elected parliamentary government.
So government by election, not birthright.
Precisely. And they insisted this government should be subject to laws interpreted by a well-trained, independent judiciary, meaning free from the influence of the rulers.
Right, checks and balances.
Exactly. However, here's a crucial distinction, one that often trips people up in exams.
Okay, important point coming up.
Liberals were not Democrats. They didn't believe in universal adult franchise, which is the right of every citizen to vote.
Ah, really? So who did they think should vote?
Well, they generally felt that only men of property should have the vote, and they specifically excluded women from this fundamental right. So, while they sought individual freedoms, their vision of political participation was still quite limited, you know?
That's a fascinating nuance.
Huh.
So, if liberals wanted limited suffrage, focused on property, how did the radicals differ? Especially on who should have power and their views on property.
That's where the radicals really stood apart. They championed a nation where the government's power rested on the majority of the country's population, a much broader concept of political participation.
Okay, majority rule.
Yes. And significantly, they were vocal and active supporters of women's suffragette movements, actively campaigning for women's right to vote.
So more inclusive than the liberals on that front.
Definitely. And unlike liberals, radicals fiercely opposed the inherited privileges of great landowners and wealthy factory owners. Now, to be clear, they weren't entirely against the existence of private property.
Ah, okay. So not completely anti-property.
Not necessarily against its existence, no. But what they disliked, even despised, was its concentration in the hands of a very few. They believed this extreme concentration created deep inequality and prevented the majority from benefiting from society's wealth. That was the core issue for them.
The concentration of wealth.
Precisely. And then, of course, we have the conservatives. Initially, back in the 18th century, they were fundamentally resistant to any change. They preferred to uphold the traditional order, the aristocracy, the church, the monarchy.
Holding on to the past.
Exactly. But the sheer force of the French Revolution, well, it compelled even conservatives to eventually acknowledge the need for some change. By the 19th century, they reluctantly accepted that change was inevitable.
But on their terms.
Yes, very much so. They firmly insisted that the past had to be respected, and any transformation should occur through a very slow, gradual process, preserving as much of the old structure as possible.
Okay, slow, cautious change.
So imagine these three distinct, often clashing visions constantly interacting, pulling in different directions amidst the social and political turmoil that defined 19th century Europe. Their struggles ultimately shaped the very limits and potential of political tendencies for decades to come.
It really does sound like a boiling pot of ideas. Beyond these political debates, what were the practical, everyday social and economic changes that were literally reshaping the European landscape at the time?
Yes, those political shifts were happening against a backdrop of truly profound social and economic transformation. This was the era of the Industrial Revolution.
Right, the big one.
Huge. This meant the rise of brand new cities, the rapid growth of industrialized regions, and the unprecedented expansion of railway networks. But with this incredible progress came a harsh new reality for the workforce.
The human cost.
Exactly. Men, women, even children were drawn into factories. They often endured incredibly long working hours, sometimes up to 15-hour shifts for very poor wages.
15 hours. Unimaginable today.
It was brutal, and unemployment was a constant dread, especially during periods of low demand for goods. It led to immense precarity for working families. Plus, the rapid, unplanned growth of towns meant severe housing and sanitation problems. Overcrowded, unsanitary conditions became the norm for countless families. Just grim realities.
So not exactly a picture of progress for everyone.
Not at all. And it's interesting to note that many liberals and radicals, despite perhaps sympathizing with workers, were themselves property owners and employers.
Ah, interesting dynamic.
Yes. They often believed strongly in the value of individual effort, labor, and enterprise, things that had, after all, allowed them to amass their own wealth. Their conviction was often quite simple. If individual freedom was truly ensured, if the poor could labor productively, and if capital could operate without undue restraint, then societies would inevitably develop and prosper.
So a belief in free enterprise driving progress.
Correct. And this belief, this promise of societal development, actually drew many working men and women who were desperate for change in their own lives to rally behind these liberal and radical groups. They saw them as their best hope for a better future.
Okay, I see. So workers allied with them for change.
Yes. And beyond these internal transformations, there was also this growing desire among some nationalists, liberals, and radicals to actively overthrow the monarchical governments reestablished across Europe after 1815.
Right, after Napoleon.
Exactly. In places like France, Italy, Germany, even Russia, these individuals became active revolutionaries, often conspiring to dismantle the existing monarchies. A prime example is Giuseppe Mazzini, the renowned Italian nationalist.
Mazzini, yes, heard of him.
He famously conspired to create nations where all citizens would enjoy equal rights. And his writings, his ideas, they resonated far beyond Italy. They were widely read and discussed, inspiring nationalists even, as we noted earlier, in India. It just underscores how interconnected these revolutionary ideas truly were across continents.
The incredible reach. Now, amidst all these political and economic shifts, this new and profoundly influential vision started to emerge. Socialism. What were its core tenets? How did its proponents envision a society without private property? It sounds like a completely different worldview.
It absolutely was a radical departure. By the mid-19th century, socialism had become a widely known, quite compelling body of ideas across Europe. And at its very heart, socialism was fundamentally opposed to private property.
Okay, that's the core. Opposition to private property.
Yes. Socialists saw private property as the root cause of nearly all the social ills of their time, the poverty, the inequality, the exploitation. Their logic was pretty straightforward.
How so?
Well, they argued that individuals who owned property, factories, land, capital tended to prioritize their personal gain. And this often came at the direct expense of the welfare of those who actually made that property productive, the workers, essentially.
Right, profit over people, in their view.
That was the critique, yes. So the socialist argument was, if society as a whole, rather than isolated individuals, controlled property, then collective social interests would naturally be prioritized. They campaigned vigorously for this fundamental shift, seeing it as the only way to achieve true equality and social justice.
So collective ownership for collective good. But if private property was the problem, how exactly did they imagine this new propertyless society would function? Did all socialists agree on the blueprint?
Not at all. And this is where the fascinating internal debates within socialism emerged. They all agreed on the goal ending the problems caused by private property, but they had very different visions for how to achieve and implement a socialist future.
Different paths to the same goal.
Precisely. Some believed strongly in the idea of cooperatives. Take Robert Owen, an English manufacturer from that era. He was quite a visionary. He actually tried to put his ideas into practice, attempting to build a cooperative community called New Harmony in Indiana, USA.
A real-world experiment.
Yes, he truly believed that collective living and working could create a superior society. However, other socialists felt that such cooperatives couldn't possibly be built on a large enough scale just through individual initiative. They argued government encouragement, even support, was absolutely essential.
So state intervention was needed.
That was their view. Louis Blanc in France, for example, was a strong advocate for government-supported cooperatives. He envisioned these as associations where people produced goods together and then shared the profits fairly based on the work each member contributed, replacing capitalist enterprises with worker cooperatives backed by the state.
Okay, different models emerging.
Exactly. But then came the profound and frankly revolutionary ideas of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, which really shifted the debate.
Marx and Engels, the big names.
Indeed. Marx, in particular, argued that industrial society was inherently capitalist. He observed that capitalists owned the factories and machinery, and the immense profit they accumulated was, in his analysis, solely produced by the labor of the workers.
The labor theory of value.
Essentially, yes. Marx believed that the conditions of the workers could never truly improve as long as private capitalists continued to accumulate this profit. It was baked into the system, he argued.
So reform wasn't enough.
Not according to Marx. His call was radical. Workers must overthrow capitalism and the system of private property altogether. To liberate themselves from this exploitation, he argued, workers had to construct a radically socialist society where all property was socially controlled. He called this ultimate classless society a communist society.
Communism as the end goal.
Yes. Marx was convinced that workers would inevitably triumph in their struggle against capitalists. He viewed a communist society not just as an ideal, but as the natural and inevitable society of the future, a very powerful, deterministic vision.
That's a profound difference in worldview. So just to really crystallize this for our listeners, perhaps for an exam question, what are the two absolute core distinctions between how capitalists and socialists view private property?
That's an excellent way to frame it. The fundamental ideological divide lies right here. Under capitalism, private property is owned primarily for individual profit. The owner's main objective is personal gain, wealth accumulation.
Okay, profit motive.
Exactly. In stark contrast, under socialism, the ideal is the collective ownership of property, and the overarching aim is serving collective social welfare, ensuring benefits for everyone, especially those who contribute their labor to make that property productive.
Collective good versus individual gain.
That's the essence of it. And by the 1870s, these socialist ideas had truly gained significant momentum, spreading right across Europe. To coordinate their efforts internationally, socialists formed a major body known as the Second International.
An international movement.
Very much so. Across England and Germany, workers began forming associations, actively campaigning for better living and working conditions. They even set up mutual aid funds to support members during times of distress, like unemployment or illness.
Practical support networks.
Yes, and crucially, they also campaigned rigorously for reduced working hours and demanded the fundamental right to vote. In Germany, these workers' associations collaborated very closely with the Social Democratic Party, the SPD. This helped the party win parliamentary seats, giving socialists a direct political voice.
Gaining political traction.
Definitely. By 1905, the movement was strong enough that socialists and trade unionists in Britain came together to form the Labour Party. And in France, the Socialist Party was established around the same time.
So they had political parties, a growing movement. Did they actually manage to form governments or truly reshape policy before, say, 1914?
That's the interesting part. Despite the growing popular support and the presence of strong socialist figures in parliaments, socialists never actually succeeded in forming a government anywhere in Europe before 1914.
Really? Why not?
Well, governments continued to be primarily run by conservatives, liberals, and radicals. The establishment was still quite resistant. However, their ideas were incredibly influential. They constantly pushed for reforms that significantly benefited workers and the broader society, shaping legislation even from the opposition benches.
So influence without direct power.
In many ways, yes. And it's also worth highlighting a really significant historical event here, one that served as a powerful premonition almost of later socialist revolutions, the Paris Commune of 1871.
Ah, the Commune. Tell us about that.
It was a popular uprising in Paris between March and May 1871. A people's government, essentially a commune, took over the city. It was comprised of workers, ordinary citizens, professionals, political activists, a real grassroots takeover.
Wow. How long did it last?
Sadly, it was ultimately crushed quite brutally by French government troops, but despite its short life, it was celebrated by socialists worldwide as this powerful, inspiring prelude to a socialist revolution.
A symbol of what was possible.
Exactly. And the Paris Commune is also famously remembered for two lasting symbols. Its association with the workers' red flag, which became adopted by revolutionaries everywhere.
The red flag.
Yes.
Ah.
And the Marseillaise. Originally a war song, it became a potent symbol of the Commune and the broader struggle for liberty. This event, though brief, deeply resonated with socialist movements globally.
That's a powerful symbol indeed. Now let's pivot, as you said, to Russia. Unlike Western Europe, Russia was one of the least industrialized European states, yet socialists actually took over the government there in 1917. Before we get to the revolution itself, what were the unique socioeconomic and political conditions in the Russian Empire that really set the stage for such a radical transformation?
That's a crucial question because Russia's path was indeed quite distinct due to its unique internal conditions. In 1914, the Russian Empire was just immense, incredibly diverse, ruled by Tsar Nicholas II.
How vast are we talking?
Vast. Beyond the Russian heartland, it sprawled across present-day Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, parts of Poland, Ukraine, Belarus. It stretched all the way to the Pacific, encompassing Central Asian states, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. A huge landmass.
And diverse population, too.
Immensely diverse. Religiously, the majority was Russian Orthodox Christian, but the empire also included significant populations of Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, and Buddhists. This vastness and diversity certainly added layers of complexity to its social fabric.
Okay, and economically. What was society like before 1917?
Well, the most striking feature was the overwhelming dominance of agriculture. At the beginning of the 20th century, a staggering 85% of Russia's population were agriculturists.
85%. That's huge compared to Western Europe.
Much higher. In France or Germany, it was typically around 40–50%.
Yeah.
Russian cultivators produced enough not just for their own needs, but also for the market, making Russia a major exporter of grain.
So, predominantly an agrarian society. What about industry, then? Was it completely absent, or were there pockets?
Not entirely absent, no, but certainly concentrated. Industry did exist, but it was clustered in specific pockets, primarily in cities like St. Petersburg and Moscow.
Right, the main centers.
Yes. A lot of production was still done by craftsmen in small workshops, but large factories operated alongside them. The 1890s actually saw significant industrial growth, largely driven by the expansion of Russia's railway network and a surge in foreign investment.
Infrastructure driving growth.
Exactly. This led to coal production doubling and iron and steel output quadrupling. By the 1900s, in some industrial areas, factory workers and craftsmen were almost equal in number.
Okay, so industry was growing but concentrated. What were conditions like for those workers?
Generally quite poor. Most industries remained the private property of industrialists. While the government theoretically supervised large factories, minimum wages, limited hours, factory inspectors often struggled to prevent rules from being broken.
Enforcement was weak.
Very often. In smaller craft units, the working day could stretch to an exhausting 15 hours, compared to maybe 10 or 12 in larger factories. Accommodation also varied hugely, from small, cramped rooms to these large, incredibly crowded dormitories where workers might even sleep in shifts.
Grim conditions.
Very grim. And the workers themselves were a remarkably divided social group. Some kept strong ties with their home villages, maybe returning seasonally, while others had settled permanently in the cities.
Divisions within the working class.
Yes, divided by skill, too. Metal workers, for instance, often considered themselves the aristocrats among workers because their trade required more training and skill.
Hierarchy even there.
And it's important to note, by 1914, women made up a significant 31% of the factory labor force. Yet they were consistently paid less than men, typically between half and three-quarters of a man's wage.
The gender pay gap was stark even then.
Very stark. These divisions were even reflected in their dress and manner sometimes. Now, some workers did manage to form associations for mutual aid during unemployment or hardship, but these groups were relatively few.
But they did unite sometimes.
Oh, yes. Despite the divisions, workers absolutely united when faced with grievances, dismissals, poor work conditions. Strikes were actually quite common, particularly in the textile industry around 1896-97 and in the metal industry in 1902. Clear signs of growing unrest.
It sounds like the industrial workers were a significant but internally complex potential force for change. What about the vast peasant population? How did they fit into this volatile picture, especially regarding land ownership?
The peasantry was another critical piece of the puzzle, yes. They cultivated most of the land, but vast properties were still owned by the nobility, the crown, and the Russian Orthodox Church.
So land ownership was very unequal.
Extremely unequal. And like the workers, peasants were also a deeply divided group. While profoundly religious, they generally harbored absolutely no respect for the nobility.
That's interesting. Why no respect?
Well, unlike some places in France where peasants sometimes respected and even fought for their nobles, in Russia, the nobles got their power and position primarily from their service to the Tsar, not from local popularity or any strong feudal ties with the peasantry.
Power derived from the state, not local connection.
Exactly. Consequently, Russian peasants harbored this intense desire for the land of the nobles to be transferred to them. This led to frequent refusals to pay rent, and even, more drastically, to the murder of landlords. This happened on a large scale in South Russia in 1902 and spread across Russia by 1905.
Wow, real violence erupting.
Yes, deep-seated resentment. And what made Russian peasants particularly unique, different from other European peasants, was their traditional practice of periodically pooling their land together.
Pooling land, how did that work?
Their commune, known as the mir, would divide this pooled land according to the needs of individual families. This communal land system was especially interesting to some Russian socialists. They saw it as a natural, inherent tendency towards socialism already present among the peasantry, a sort of proto-socialism built into their traditions.
That's a fascinating local custom with potentially huge political implications. Given this widespread discontent among both workers and peasants, how did socialist ideas specifically take root in Russia, especially when, as you said, political parties were illegal? And what were the major debates within the socialist movement there?
That's a critical point. In the Tsarist autocracy before 1914, all political parties were strictly illegal. Despite this, a significant force emerged. The Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party, founded back in 1898 by socialists deeply influenced by Marx's ideas.
Operating illegally, then.
Completely underground. Due to intense government policing, they had to set up covert newspapers, mobilize workers, organize strikes, often through secret meetings in factories. Early socialists like Alexander Shliapnikov wrote about these clandestine efforts.
High risk involved.
Extremely high risk. Now, within this burgeoning Russian socialist movement, a significant internal debate arose. Who would be the primary revolutionary force?
Peasants or workers?
Exactly. Some Russian socialists believed that the unique peasant custom of dividing land, the mir system, made them natural socialists. They argued that peasants, not industrial workers, would be the main driving force of the revolution.
An agrarian revolution, essentially.
That was their thinking. And they believed Russia could therefore become socialist more quickly than other, more industrialized countries. This viewpoint led to the formation of the Socialist Revolutionary Party in 1900, a party specifically dedicated to fighting for peasants' rights and demanding a transfer of noble lands to the peasants.
Okay, so the Socialist Revolutionaries focused on the peasants.
Yes. But the Social Democrats, particularly those led by Vladimir Lenin, sharply disagreed.
Lenin's view was different.
Very different regarding the peasants. Lenin argued that peasants were not a united, homogeneous group. He pointed to their internal differentiation, as he called it.
Differentiation.
Yeah. Meaning some peasants were poor, others relatively rich. Some were landless laborers, while others were capitalist peasants who actually employed workers. Given this diverse economic standing, Lenin believed they couldn't all be part of a single, unified socialist movement.
Too many internal contradictions.
That was his analysis. This fundamental disagreement over the revolutionary class and also over how the party should be organized in such a repressive state led to a major split within the Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party itself.
Ah, the famous split.
Yes. The party became divided over its organizational strategy. Vladimir Lenin, leading the Bolshevik group, meaning majority, advocated for a highly disciplined, tightly controlled party. Especially crucial, he argued, in repressive Tsarist Russia. He believed the party should control the number and quality of its members to ensure effectiveness and prevent infiltration by spies.
A vanguard party model.
Precisely. In contrast, others within the party, who became known as Mensheviks, meaning minority, favored a more open, broad-based party, perhaps similar to the Social Democratic Party in Germany, allowing a wider membership.
Open versus disciplined.
Exactly. These ideological and organizational differences between the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks would prove absolutely crucial in shaping the future course of the revolution.
The stage was truly set for upheaval then. So with all these tensions simmering, autocratic rule, worker unrest, peasant demands, socialist movements, let's examine the first major eruption, the 1905 revolution, and then dive into the critical developments of 1917 that fundamentally altered Russia's political landscape.
Indeed, the internal pressures were building to a breaking point. Russia, unlike other European nations, was still an autocracy at the start of the 20th century. The Tsar wasn't subject to parliament.
Absolute power.
Essentially, yes. Liberals, social democrats, and socialist revolutionaries all campaigned vigorously to end this autocratic rule. They worked with peasants and workers during the 1905 revolution, their key demand being a constitution.
A broad coalition demanding change.
Yes, and their cause also garnered support from nationalists within the empire, like in Poland, and from jihadists, Muslim reformers, and Muslim-dominated areas who wanted a modernized Islam to guide their societies. The year 1904 proved particularly dire for Russian workers. Prices of essential goods rose so rapidly that real wages, their actual purchasing power, plummeted by a significant 20%.
20%? It's a huge hit.
Massive. This severe economic hardship led to a dramatic increase in the membership of workers' associations. The tension reached a boiling point when 4 members of the Assembly of Russian Workers, an organization formed in 1904, were dismissed at the Putilov Iron Works.
A specific trigger event.
Exactly. This dismissal triggered a massive industrial action. Over the next few days, more than 110,000 workers in St. Petersburg went on strike. Their demands were clear: an 8-hour day, wage increases, improved working conditions.
Basic demands for dignity and survival.
Absolutely. Then came the pivotal moment, etched forever in history. January 22, 1905. Bloody Sunday.
A bloody Sunday.
A procession of workers, led by a priest, Father Gapon, marched peacefully towards the Winter Palace, the Tsar's residence. They intended simply to present a petition outlining their grievances.
A peaceful appeal.
Yes. But instead of dialogue, they were met with brutal force. Police and Cossacks attacked the unarmed procession. The result was tragic. Over 100 workers were killed and about 300 wounded.
Horrific.
Yeah.
And that sparked the wider revolution.
It ignited it. This incident just unleashed a wave of revulsion and anger across Russia, becoming the catalyst for the 1905 revolution. Strikes erupted nationwide. Universities were forced to close as students walked out, protesting the blatant lack of civil liberties.
The unrest spread rapidly.
It did. In response, a broad coalition of lawyers, doctors, engineers, other middle-class workers came together. They established the Union of Unions, united in their demand for a constituent assembly to draft a new constitution for Russia.
That's a tremendous surge of public anger and organization. How did the Tsar respond to this widespread uprising? Did he make any lasting concessions?
Well, under immense pressure from the widespread unrest, the Tsar reluctantly allowed the creation of an elected consultative parliament, or Duma, during the 1905 revolution.
A parliament, fine.
A consultative one, yes. And for a brief period, trade unions and factory committees, formed by workers, flourished openly. However, the Tsar, always determined to maintain his autocratic authority, quickly showed his true colors.
The concessions didn't last.
Not really. After 1905, most of these committees and unions were declared illegal again, forced back underground. Severe restrictions were imposed on all political activity. The Tsar dismissed the first Duma within a mere 75 days.
75 days.
And the re-elected second Duma within 3 months. He clearly wouldn't tolerate any questioning of his power. To consolidate control, he then manipulated the voting laws, packing the third Duma with conservative politicians, ensuring liberals and revolutionaries were effectively excluded, a clear sign he wanted to restore full autocracy.
So a temporary concession quickly rolled back.
Exactly. Then came the devastating blow of the First World War in 1914, which had a profound and ultimately catastrophic impact on the Russian Empire.
World War I.
Yes. The war pitted the Central Powers, Germany, Austria, Turkey, against the Allies, France, Britain, and Russia, later joined by Italy and Romania. It was a global conflict. Initially, the war was actually quite popular in Russia. People rallied around Tsar Nicholas II.
Initial patriotic fervor.
Yes, but as the war dragged on, the Tsar's refusal to consult the main parties in the Duma, that parliament he'd grudgingly allowed, severely eroded public support.
Undermining his own legitimacy.
Precisely. Anti-German sentiment soared. St. Petersburg was even renamed Petrograd because St. Petersburg sounded too German. The Tsarina Alexandra's German origins, plus the influence of her perceived poor advisors, particularly the controversial monk Rasputin, made the autocracy increasingly unpopular, increasingly isolated.
The Rasputin factor.
A significant factor in public perception, yes. And the war itself was disastrous for Russia. On the Eastern Front, where Russia fought, armies were highly mobile, leading to massive battles and shocking casualties.
Huge losses.
Catastrophic. Russia suffered demoralizing defeats against Germany and Austria between 1914 and 1916. By 1917, we're talking over 7 million Russian casualties.
7 million.
An almost unbelievable number. And as Russian armies retreated, they employed a scorched earth policy, destroying crops and buildings. This created a massive internal refugee crisis, over 3 million people displaced within Russia, further discrediting the government and the Tsar. The soldiers themselves, battered by losses, demoralized, increasingly lost the will to fight.
The human and psychological toll must have been immense.
Immense. And the war also inflicted a severe blow on Russia's already struggling industrial sector. Russia had few domestic industries, and its access to foreign suppliers was cut off by German control of the Baltic Sea. Industrial equipment disintegrated rapidly.
Supply lines cut.
Yes. By 1916, even the vital railway lines began to break down. Conscripting able-bodied men for the war led to severe labor shortages, forcing many small workshops to shut down.
Economic collapse looming.
Very much so. Furthermore, large supplies of grain were diverted to feed the army. This led to acute scarcity of bread and flour in the cities. By the winter of 1916, riots at bread shops became a common, alarming sight, a clear sign of deepening crisis.
So a deeply unpopular Tsar, a collapsing economy, a demoralized army, food shortages.
Yeah.
It really sounds like a powder keg ready to explode. How did all of this finally erupt into what became known as the February Revolution in Petrograd?
The grim conditions culminated dramatically in the winter of 1917, particularly in the capital, Petrograd. Even the city's layout seemed to underscore the divisions. Workers' quarters and factories on the right bank of the River Neva, fashionable areas, the Winter Palace, official buildings, including the Duma, on the left bank.
A city divided.
Literally. In February 1917, food shortages were acutely felt in the workers' quarters. The winter was exceptionally cold, severe frost, heavy snow exacerbating the dire situation. Meanwhile, parliamentarians, desperate to preserve elected government, were vehemently opposed to the Tsar's desire to dissolve the Duma again.
Tensions running high on all sides.
Extremely high. The spark ignited on February 22nd. A lockout occurred at a factory on the right bank. The very next day, workers in 50 other factories called a strike in sympathy.
Spreading rapidly.
Yes, and it's truly inspiring how, in many factories, women workers actually led the way in these strikes. A spontaneous uprising that came to be known as International Women's Day.
Women at the forefront.
Absolutely. Demonstrating workers bravely crossed from their factory quarters to the center of the capital, the Nevsky Prospect. At this initial stage, no political party was actively organizing it. It was largely a spontaneous outpouring of discontent.
Grassroots anger.
Yes. As the fashionable quarters and official buildings became surrounded by workers, the government imposed a curfew. The demonstrators dispersed by evening, but they returned with even greater force on the 24th and 25th. The government called out the cavalry and police.
Trying to maintain control.
Yes. Then, on Sunday, February 25th, the government, feeling gravely threatened, suspended the Duma. This provoked outrage from politicians. Undeterred, demonstrators returned in force to the streets of the left bank on the 26th.
The situation escalating.
Rapidly. Then, on February 27th, a truly pivotal moment, the police headquarters were ransacked. The streets were thronged with people loudly demanding bread, better wages, shorter hours, democracy. The government tried again, called out the cavalry.
But this time?
This time, crucially, the cavalry refused to fire on the demonstrators.
Wow. The army refusing orders.
A turning point. This defiance quickly escalated. An officer was shot at the barracks of one regiment, and critically, 3 other regiments mutinied, voting to join the striking workers.
The soldiers joined the revolution.
Effectively, yes. By that very evening, soldiers and striking workers had gathered to form a Soviet, or council, in the very same building where the Duma met. This new, powerful body was named the Petrograd Soviet.
The Petrograd Soviet is formed.
Yes. The very next day, March 2nd, a delegation from the Soviet and Duma leaders went to see the Tsar. Military commanders, recognizing the complete loss of control, advised him to abdicate. Tsar Nicholas II followed their advice and formally abdicated on March 2nd.
The end of the Tsar.
The end of the monarchy. Following his abdication, the Soviet leaders and Duma leaders jointly formed a provisional government to run the country. It was decided Russia's future would be determined by a constituent assembly, elected on the basis of universal adult suffrage.
So a new government takes over.
Yes. Petrograd had successfully led the February Revolution, which fundamentally brought down the monarchy in Russia in February 1917. And the inspiring role of women workers, like Marfa Vasileva at the Lorenz telephone factory. She almost single-handedly called a successful strike, stating, "I cannot be the only one who is satiated when others are hungry," a sentiment that rallied broader support and showcased the collective power.
Incredible story. So the monarchy falls, a provisional government takes over, influenced by Duma figures and army officials, but also liberals and socialists. What happened in the months after February? How did Lenin and the Bolsheviks, who were initially a minority, gain so much influence that they could eventually launch another revolution in October?
A great question, because the period after February was incredibly dynamic, incredibly fluid. After the February Revolution, army officials, landowners, and industrialists were highly influential within the new provisional government.
The old guard still had influence.
Significant influence. However, liberals and socialists within this government also worked towards establishing an elected government. Critically, restrictions on public meetings and associations were immediately removed.
Opening up political space.
Exactly. This allowed for a surge in political activity. Soviets, like the Petrograd Soviet, rapidly sprang up everywhere across Russia. Though it's important to note, no common system of election was initially followed for these councils. They were quite spontaneous.
Okay, grassroots councils forming.
Yes. Then, a truly significant turning point came in April 1917. The Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin returned to Russia from his exile.
Lenin returns.
Yes. Lenin and the Bolsheviks had consistently opposed the war since 1914. Upon his return, he felt it was finally time for the Soviets, these workers' and soldiers' councils, to seize power. He declared what became known as his April Theses.
The April Theses, what were they?
3 key demands. First, the war must be brought to a swift close. Second, land must be immediately transferred to the peasants. Third, banks must be nationalized.
Radical demands.
Very radical. He also pushed for the Bolshevik Party to rename itself the Communist Party, signifying its new, more radical aims and its commitment to a communist society.
Signaling a clear break.
Absolutely. Now, most others in the Bolshevik Party were initially surprised, maybe even hesitant, about Lenin's April theses.
Even within his own party.
Yes. Many felt the time wasn't yet ripe for a full-scale socialist revolution. They thought the provisional government still needed support to consolidate democratic gains first. However, subsequent developments over the summer months began to shift their perspective.
What kind of developments?
Well, the workers' movement just kept spreading rapidly. In industrial areas, factory committees were formed, and these committees began actively questioning how industrialists ran their factories. Trade unions grew significantly. Soldiers' committees formed within the army, further democratizing things.
Power shifting downwards.
It seemed that way. By June, about 500 Soviets had sent representatives to an all-Russian Congress of Soviets, indicating the growing network and power of these councils across the country.
The Soviets gaining strength.
Definitely. And as the provisional government saw its own power diminishing and Bolshevik influence growing, it decided to take stern measures. It resisted attempts by workers to run factories, began arresting various leaders, and brutally repressed popular demonstrations staged by the Bolsheviks in July 1917. Many Bolshevik leaders were forced to go into hiding or flee.
Government crackdown.
Yes. Meanwhile, simultaneously, in the countryside, peasants and their socialist revolutionary leaders, emboldened by the changes, vigorously pressed for land redistribution. Land committees were formed, and encouraged by the socialist revolutionaries, peasants seized land between July and September 1917, prefiguring the massive land redistribution later undertaken by the Bolsheviks.
So the provisional government was losing control in the cities and the countryside, and the Bolsheviks were gaining momentum despite the crackdown. How did Lenin then orchestrate the decisive October Revolution to actually seize power? What were the key steps?
The conflict between the provisional government and the Bolsheviks just escalated sharply through September. Lenin, fearing the provisional government might establish a dictatorship and crush the revolution, began actively discussing and planning an armed uprising.
Moving from theory to action.
Exactly. He meticulously brought together Bolshevik supporters within the army, the Soviets, the factories, preparing for a decisive move. On October 16, 1917, Lenin successfully persuaded the Petrograd Soviet and the Bolshevik Party leadership to agree to a socialist seizure of power.
The decision was made.
Yes. A military revolutionary committee, or MRC, was then appointed by the Soviet under the leadership of Leon Trotsky to actually organize the seizure, and the exact date was kept a closely guarded secret.
Trotsky organizing the military side.
Correct. The uprising itself began swiftly on October 24th. Sensing trouble was imminent, the Prime Minister, Kerensky, had already left the city to try and summon loyal troops. At dawn, military units loyal to the government moved to seize the buildings of 2 Bolshevik newspapers.
The government tries to strike first.
Yes, they sent troops to take over telephone and telegraph offices and to protect the Winter Palace, the seat of the provisional government. But in a rapid and decisive countermove, the Military Revolutionary Committee ordered its supporters to seize government offices and arrest the ministers.
A swift counterattack.
Very swift. Later that day, a crucial symbolic act. The Bolshevik cruiser Aurora shelled the Winter Palace, signaling the full-scale assault. Other vessels sailed down the Neva River and took over various military points across the city.
Using naval power, too.
Yes. By nightfall, the city was firmly under the committee's control, and the ministers of the provisional government had surrendered.
It happened that quickly, in a day.
The main seizure in Petrograd was incredibly swift, yes. At a subsequent meeting of the All-Russian Congress of Soviets in Petrograd, the majority approved the Bolshevik action, effectively legitimizing the seizure of power in the eyes of the Soviets.
Soviet approval secured.
Yes. Uprisings quickly followed in other cities across Russia. There was heavy fighting, particularly in Moscow, where resistance was stronger. But by December, the Bolsheviks had consolidated control over the crucial Moscow-Petrograd area.
Control established in the key centers.
Exactly. Now, a quick but important point for understanding the timelines, especially for exams. Russia followed the Julian calendar until February 1st, 1918. After that, it adopted the Gregorian calendar, which we use today.
Oh, the calendar difference.
Yes, the Gregorian dates are 13 days ahead of the Julian dates. So by our current calendar, the February Revolution actually took place on March 12th, and the October Revolution occurred on November 7th. Just clarifies why we use those names based on the old calendar.
Got it. October Revolution is November by our calendar. So the October Revolution marked this monumental shift. What immediate sweeping changes did the Bolsheviks implement right after taking power? And what challenges did they face in trying to build this new socialist society, especially with the onset of the Civil War?
The October Revolution ushered in immediate and truly radical changes, a profound break from Russia's past. The Bolsheviks were, as we discussed, fundamentally opposed to private property, and this conviction was immediately reflected in their first decrees.
Straight into action.
Absolutely. Most industries and banks were nationalized in November 1917, meaning the government took over ownership and management, shifting them from private to state control.
Nationalization of key assets.
Yes. Land was declared social property, and peasants were explicitly allowed to seize land from the nobility without compensation. This fulfilled a long-standing demand of the peasantry.
Land to the peasants.
Exactly. In cities, the Bolsheviks enforced the partition of large houses according to family requirements, aiming to address housing shortages and wealth disparities. Old aristocracy titles were banned, symbolically dismantling the old-class hierarchy.
Undoing the old order.
Visibly. To assert this new order, new uniforms were even designed for the army, and officials, the Soviet hat, or Budanovka, became an iconic symbol chosen after a competition in 1918. And the Bolshevik Party itself was renamed the Russian Communist Party, signifying its radical communist aims.
Clear symbolic changes, too. But how did they consolidate power, especially when, as you mentioned, they failed to gain a majority in that Constituent Assembly election?
Oh, yeah.
Did Russia immediately become a stable socialist state?
Oh, the path to consolidating power was far from straightforward, far from stable initially. In November 1917, the Bolsheviks did conduct elections to the Constituent Assembly, but surprisingly, they failed to gain a majority.
They lost the election.
They didn't get a majority, no. Consequently, in January 1918, when the Assembly convened, it rejected Bolshevik measures. Lenin's response was decisive. He dismissed the Assembly.
Just dismissed the elected assembly.
He did. He argued that the All-Russian Congress of Soviets, representing the workers' and soldiers' councils, was more democratic and truly reflected the people's will than an assembly elected under such uncertain, rapidly changing conditions.
Prioritizing the Soviets over the assembly.
Yes. Then, in March 1918, despite significant opposition from their political allies who wanted to continue the war, the Bolsheviks made a separate peace with Germany at Brest-Litovsk, fulfilling that April Theses demand to end the war. A controversial but decisive move.
Pulling Russia out of World War I.
Correct. In the years that followed, Russia effectively transformed into a one-party state. The Bolsheviks became the only party permitted to participate in elections to the All-Russian Congress of Soviets, which then became the country's parliament.
A one-party system emerges.
Yes. Trade unions were also brought under strict party control. And to suppress dissent, the secret police, initially called the Cheka, later OGPU and NKVD, harshly punished those who criticized the Bolsheviks. This led to a climate of fear and severe repression.
The secret police and repression.
While initially many young writers and artists enthusiastically rallied to the party, drawn by the promise of socialism and radical change, many later became disillusioned. The widespread censorship the party encouraged stifled artistic freedom and critical thought. This tension between revolutionary ideals and authoritarian control was an early defining characteristic.
Ideals versus reality starting to clash.
Very much so. And the Bolsheviks' land redistribution policy, while immensely popular with the peasants, inadvertently triggered the brutal Russian Civil War, which raged from 1918 to 1920.
How did land redistribution trigger war?
Well, as peasant soldiers, eager to return home for their share of the newly socialized land, deserted the army en masse, the Russian army just began to break up, losing its coherence. Meanwhile, non-Bolshevik socialists, liberals, and supporters of the old autocracy vehemently condemned the Bolshevik uprising as an illegitimate seizure of power.
Opposition forces organized.
Exactly. Their leaders moved to southern Russia and began organizing troops to fight the Bolsheviks, who were known as the Reds. During 1918 and 1919, two main anti-Bolshevik forces emerged. The Greens, who were socialist revolutionaries, and the Whites, primarily pro-Tsarists. These forces controlled most of the vast Russian Empire initially, leading to widespread, devastating conflict.
Greens, whites versus reds. So it wasn't just an internal struggle then. I understand there was significant foreign intervention as well. Why did international powers get involved, and what were the consequences of this civil war for the Russian people?
You're absolutely right. Crucially, the Whites and Greens received significant foreign backing troops and supplies from French, American, British, and Japanese forces.
Why did they intervene?
These international powers were deeply worried about the spread of socialism from Russia to their own countries and colonies. They saw Bolshevism as a threat and thus intervened to support the anti-Bolshevik forces, hoping to strangle the revolution in its cradle.
Fear of communism spreading.
Precisely. As these foreign troops and the various Russian factions fought a brutal civil war, the consequences for ordinary people were catastrophic. Widespread looting, banditry, and famine became tragically common across the country.
Devastation for the population.
Immense suffering, and supporters of private property among the whites took particularly harsh steps against peasants who had seized land, trying to reverse the redistribution. Such actions, however, led to a significant loss of popular support for the non-Bolsheviks among the vast peasant population. They alienated the very people they needed.
Undermining their own call.
Exactly. This loss of peasant support ultimately hampered their war efforts significantly. By January 1920, the Bolsheviks had largely consolidated control over most of the former Russian Empire.
The Bolsheviks won the Civil War. Why?
Their victory was partly attributed to their cooperation with non-Russian nationalities and Muslim jihadists who had their own long-standing grievances against the old Tsarist regime. They managed to forge alliances, sometimes tenuous ones.
Alliances were key.
Yes, but this cooperation wasn't always smooth. In instances where Russian colonists, themselves now Bolsheviks, acted brutally, cooperation failed. A stark example is in Khiva, Central Asia. Bolshevik colonists massacred local nationalists in the name of defending socialism.
Actions contradicting ideals.
Exactly. This created deep confusion and distrust among many about the true intentions and nature of the Bolshevik government. It wasn't a simple liberation for everyone. To try and address these concerns and better incorporate the vast diversity of the former empire, the Bolsheviks made a significant political decision. Most non-Russian nationalities were granted political autonomy within the Soviet Union, or USSR, the new state officially created from the Russian Empire in December 1922.
The formation of the USSR autonomy granted.
On paper, yes, political autonomy was granted. However, this was often combined with unpopular policies that the Bolsheviks forced local governments to implement, such as the harsh discouragement of nomadism among Central Asian peoples. Consequently, their attempts to fully win over and integrate the different nationalities were only partially successful, leaving underlying tensions.
So autonomy, but with strings attached.
You could say that. It's important to consider contrasting views on the revolution's impact, especially in places like Central Asia. We have sources like M.N. Roy, the Indian revolutionary who visited in the 1920s. He recalled the joy of the Kyrgyz people seeing the revolution as freedom, shouting, "Long live the revolution," a very positive initial reception.
Seeing it as liberation.
Yes. But then you have a Kazakh leader writing in 1919 offering a starkly different perspective. He said the first revolution, February, was welcomed, but the second, October, brought consternation and terror, violence, pillage, taxes, and dictatorial power. He felt the new regime just perpetuated the old oppression under new masters.
Two very different experiences of the same events.
Exactly. It highlights the complex and often contradictory experiences of different groups within the vast Soviet sphere. Not a monolithic story at all.
So once the Civil War was largely won, the Bolsheviks truly embarked on this massive project to transform Russia into a socialist society. How did they go about building this new economy through centralized planning? And what were the consequences of Stalin's later, highly controversial collectivization program?
With the Civil War mostly concluded, the Bolsheviks moved decisively to construct their vision of a socialist society. Even during the war, they'd kept industries and banks nationalized. State control remained paramount. They permitted peasants to continue cultivating the socialized land and even used confiscated noble lands to demonstrate collective farming methods.
Setting the stage for bigger changes.
Precisely. The very core of their economic transformation was the introduction of centralized planning. Government officials systematically assessed the economy and set ambitious targets for 5-year periods. This led to the famous 5-year plans. The first two ran from 1927, 1932, and 1933, 1938.
5-year plans, what was the goal?
The primary goal was rapid industrial growth, particularly in heavy industries like coal, steel, oil. To achieve this, the government fixed all prices.
State control over the entire economy.
Essentially, yes. And the centralized planning did lead to significant economic growth, at least in terms of raw industrial output. Industrial production saw dramatic increases between 1929 and 1933. Oil, coal, and steel production reportedly increased by 100%. New factory cities, like Magnitogorsk, emerged rapidly, symbolizing this new industrial might.
That sounds like incredible progress in a very short time.
Yeah.
Almost miraculous growth. But what was the human cost of this rapid industrialization? Were the working conditions actually as ideal as the socialist vision might suggest?
That's the crucial counterpoint. This rapid construction came at a steep human cost, leading to extremely poor working conditions. Magnitogorsk, that symbol of progress, was built in just 3 years, an impressive feat. But workers endured incredibly harsh lives. In the first year alone, there were 550 work stoppages, indicating immense discontent. Workers lived in dire conditions. We have accounts of people in winter, at 40 degrees below zero, having to climb down 4 floors and run across the street just to use a toilet.
Unbelievably harsh.
It vividly illustrates the gap between the ambitious targets and the grim reality for ordinary workers. Now, despite these hardships, the Soviet state did also make significant social provisions, although their impact was often uneven due to limited resources. An extended schooling system developed, arrangements were made for factory workers and peasants to enter universities, opening up education.
Social improvements alongside industrialization.
Yes, efforts were made. Creches were established in factories for children of women workers, supporting female labor participation. Cheap public health care was provided. Model living quarters were set up for some workers, but the effect was uneven. Resources were stretched thin.
So progress, but limited and patchy.
Exactly, and the realities often fell painfully short of the ideals. A poignant example comes from a 1933 letter written by a 13-year-old worker to Soviet President Kalinin.
A letter from a child worker.
Yes. It starkly highlights the personal hardship. The child describes a large family, a father who died fighting for the workers' cause, an ailing mother. Despite wanting desperately to study, having a good record, the child couldn't attend school. Why? Torn boots, no money, no bread.
Heartbreaking.
It ends with the child having to work in a factory to prevent the family from starving. It just underscores the severe poverty and the inability to access basic provisions, even as the state promoted grand educational goals. A huge gap between rhetoric and reality.
That letter brings a stark human element to the grand economic plans. Speaking of economic plans, you mentioned Stalin's collectivization program. What exactly was that, and why was it so controversial, so devastating?
Collectivization. The period of the early planned economy was intrinsically linked to the disasters of the collectivization of agriculture, spearheaded by Joseph Stalin after Lenin's death. By 1927-1928, Soviet towns faced an acute grain supply problem.
Grain shortages again. Why?
Peasants, mostly on small individual holdings post-1917, refused to sell grain to government buyers at the fixed low prices. Stalin believed kulaks, the term for well-to-do peasants and traders, were hoarding stocks, hoping for higher prices, speculating. He introduced firm emergency measures, stop speculation, confiscate supplies.
Belonging to peasants.
Specifically the kulaks. In 1928, party members toured grain areas, supervising enforced grain collections, raiding kulaks. But shortages persisted, so the decision was made: forced collectivization of farms.
Forced collectivization. What was the rationale?
The argument was that shortages were partly due to the small size of individual peasant holdings inefficient, couldn't be modernized. To develop modern, large-scale farms run with machinery, they argued it was necessary to eliminate kulaks, take their land, and establish large, state-controlled collective farms, the kolkhoz.
Industrializing agriculture by force.
That was the idea. Stalin's collectivization program began in earnest from 1929. The party forced all peasants to cultivate in these collective farms. Land implements all transfer to kolkhoz ownership. Peasants worked the land, profits were supposed to be shared.
How did the peasants react?
With fury and widespread resistance. Many destroyed their livestock rather than hand them over. Cattle numbers plummeted by a third between 1929 and 1931. Those who resisted were severely punished, many deported, exiled to remote areas.
Brutal repression.
But they just didn't want
To farms for various reasons. They preferred their individual plots. While Stalin's government eventually allowed some independent cultivation, these cultivators were treated very unsympathetically.
Did collectivization even work? Did it increase production?
Crucially, no, not immediately. Production did not increase as hoped. In fact, the combination of forced collectivization, the chaos it caused, and bad harvests between 1930 and 1933 led to one of the most devastating famines in Soviet history.
Famine. How bad?
Catastrophic. Over 4 million people died.
4 million. From famine caused by policy.
Largely attributed to the disruptions and resistance caused by collectivization, yes. This period also saw significant purges within the party itself. Many criticized the confusion in industry, the consequences of collectivization. Stalin and his supporters charged these critics with conspiracy against socialism.
Purging dissent.
On a massive scale, accusations spread, leading to widespread arrests. By 1939, over 2 million people were in prisons or labor camps, the gulags. Many were innocent, talented professionals forced to make false confessions under torture, then executed. Brutal methods to enforce Stalin's vision.
The Great Purge.
Yes. And the official view, like in reports to the party, painted peasant resistance as mass insurrections justifying arrests and executions. This contrasts sharply with personal accounts, like a peasant's letter detailing impossible taxes, property confiscation, everything sold to the kolkhoz, huts taken away, the profound personal cost for ordinary people.
That truly exposes the chasm between official narrative and lived experience. The Russian Revolution wasn't just a domestic affair, though. It profoundly impacted global thought and political movements. What was its international influence, and how is this complex legacy viewed today?
You're absolutely right. The Russian Revolution resonated far beyond Russia's borders. Now, existing socialist parties in Europe didn't entirely approve of the methods the Bolsheviks used, the seizure of power, the repression.
Reservations about the methods.
Yes. But the sheer idea of a worker state, the first successful socialist revolution, deeply fired people's imaginations across the world. In many countries, inspired by the Bolshevik example, communist parties were formed like the Communist Party of Great Britain, a direct ideological influence.
Spawning communist parties globally.
Yes, and the Bolsheviks actively encouraged colonial peoples to follow their revolutionary experiment, seeing common cause with anti-imperialist struggles. Many non-Russians from outside the USSR participated in gatherings like the Conference of the Peoples of the East in 1920, and the Bolshevik-founded Comintern, the Communist International, a union of pro-Bolshevik parties.
Exporting revolution.
Promoting it, certainly. Some even received education in the USSR's Communist University of the Workers of the East, becoming future leaders in their own nations. By the outbreak of World War II, the USSR had successfully given socialism a global face, a significant world stature. It transformed it from theory into a powerful, tangible political force.
That's quite an impact, taking it from theory to global movement. But as time went on, the Soviet experiment's reputation also faced, well, significant criticism. What was the nuanced legacy of the USSR, balancing its achievements with its undeniable shortcomings?
Indeed, the Soviet legacy is incredibly complex. By the 1950s, a sense of disillusionment began to set in, even within the USSR itself. It was increasingly acknowledged that the style of government that had evolved, particularly under Stalin, wasn't really in keeping with the original, perhaps more noble, ideals of the Russian Revolution.
Internal acknowledgement of problems.
Yes, and within the broader world socialist movement, too, it was recognized that all was not well in the Soviet Union. On one hand, you had undeniable achievements. A backward country transformed into a great industrial power. Industries and agriculture developed significantly. The poor were, for the most part, being fed. These were considerable accomplishments many admired.
Real material progress for some.
Yes. But on the other hand, the failings were stark. The Soviet system denied essential freedoms to its citizens. It carried out its ambitious developmental projects through highly repressive policies, collectivization, the purges, censorship.
The dark side.
Exactly. By the end of the 20th century, the international reputation of the USSR as a beacon of socialism had significantly declined. Yet, it's important to note, socialist ideals still enjoyed considerable respect among its own people, even if the practical implementation was seen as deeply flawed. Ultimately, the ideas of socialism were rethought, reinterpreted in diverse ways across the globe, leading to many different paths.
So, the idea lived on, but the Soviet model lost its shine.
That's a fair summary. And the Russian Revolution had a particularly strong and inspiring influence right here in India. Many Indians attended that communist university in the USSR. By the mid-1920s, the Communist Party of India was formed, maintaining close contact with the Soviet Communist Party.
Direct links to India's political movements.
Absolutely. Important Indian political and cultural figures, Jawaharlal Nehru, Rabindranath Tagore, took a keen interest. They visited Russia, wrote about Soviet socialism, sharing their observations with the Indian public.
Nehru and Tagore were impressed.
They were certainly engaged and often impressed by certain aspects, particularly the focus on mass education and industrialization, though they also had criticisms. There was extensive writing in India reflecting these impressions in Hindi. R.S. Avasti wrote about Lenin and the revolution. S.D. Vidyalankar wrote about the Soviet state. And much was written in Bengali, Marathi, Malayalam, Tamil, Telugu. Widespread intellectual engagement.
A real fascination across India.
Yes, and primary source accounts offer fascinating insights. Shaukat Usmani, an Indian revolutionary visiting in 1920, was deeply impressed by the apparent equality. He wrote of seeing Europeans mixing freely with Asians for the first time, feeling he'd come to a land of real equality, seeing freedom in its true light. Despite the poverty, he saw people as more jovial and satisfied, fearless, with no barriers of caste or religion.
A very positive first impression.
Yes. Similarly, Rabindranath Tagore, writing from Russia in 1930, expressed astonishment. Moscow seemed less clean, people less smart than elsewhere, but the whole place belongs to the workers. He was struck by how the masses had come forward in the open. He contrasted it sharply with India, marveling at how a previously illiterate, helpless mass had, in just a decade, removed the mountain of ignorance and helplessness. He found it astounding. These accounts underscore the profound impact and inspiration the revolution provided to India's own freedom struggle and its intellectual leaders.
Fascinating perspectives. As we conclude this detailed exploration then, you, our listeners, should now have a comprehensive understanding of the powerful forces that shaped modern Europe and the truly momentous events of the Russian Revolution. We've traced the evolution of political ideologies, liberals, radicals, conservatives.
And the rise of socialism.
Exactly. We examined the socioeconomic backdrop, the impact of industrialization. We analyzed the major events in 1905 and, of course, 1917, February and October.
We looked at the immediate and long-term changes under Bolshevik rule, under Stalinism, the planning, the collectivization.
And finally, we looked at the global implications, the varied legacies, including its specific impact right here in India.
Remember, understanding the nuances here, the differences between the groups, the causes and effects of the revolutions, the complex nature of early Soviet society, it's absolutely crucial, not just for your exams.
Right.
It also offers invaluable insights for critically understanding the world around you today. Thinking about how grand social experiments promise, deliver, and sometimes, tragically, fall short. These lessons from history remain incredibly relevant.
Well said. We certainly hope this deep dive has provided you with invaluable insights and clarity on this crucial period. Stay tuned for more exam-ready insights from us. Subscribe to never miss a topic breakdown. In this deep dive, we covered the following topics: the age of social change, liberals, radicals, and conservatives; the age of social change, industrial society and its impact, the coming of socialism to Europe, visions of Owen, Blank, and Marx, the coming of socialism to Europe, support for socialism in the Paris Commune, the Russian Empire in 1914, economy and society, the Russian Empire in 1914, socialism in Russia and internal debates, the Russian Empire in 1914, the 1905 Revolution and Bloody Sunday, the Russian Empire in 1914, the aftermath of February and Lenin's April theses, the Russian Empire in 1914, the October Revolution of 1917, changes after October, nationalization of one-party rule, changes after October, the Russian Civil War, making a socialist society, 5-year plans and social provisions, Stalinism and collectivization, policies, resistance, and famine, Stalinism and collectivization, global influence of the Russian Revolution and its legacy, Stalinism and collectivization, the Russian Revolution's impact and reception in India.